In this video, I'm going to show you how to mix every color you need from these 5 colors. We're going to start by making a color wheel. If you've never seen a color wheel before, it's a circular diagram that helps us understand the relationships between colors. The limited color palette that I'm using in this demonstration has one of each primary color. A yellow, in this case I'm using cadmium lemon, a red, I'm using cadmium red medium, and a blue, I'm using ultramarine blue. And we're going to space the primary colors evenly around the color wheel, and in between them, we'll mix secondary colors, so orange between yellow and red, green between yellow and blue, and purple between red and blue. Between the secondary and primary colors, we'll also mix what are called tertiary colors, which would be like a blue-green, a red-orange, a yellow-green, and so on. Something that you'll quickly pick up on when you start blending paints is that you often have to mix more of one color than another to get an intermediate color. For example, I have to add more yellow than red to get the orange in the middle, and I have to add more red than blue to get purple. And I have to add a lot more yellow than blue to get a medium green color. This difference is called tinting strength. Ultramarine blue has a higher tinting strength than cadmium red and a much higher tinting strength than cadmium lemon. It basically overwhelms the yellow, so I'm not adding that much when I'm mixing the greens. Here's our finished color wheel. Below it, we'll combine ultramarine blue and burnt umber to make a black, which we'll then tint with titanium white. To make the black, I'm mixing about a 1-to-1 ratio of burnt umber to blue. If you want a warmer black, you can add a little more burnt umber, and if you want a cooler black, you can mix in a little more blue. When I use the word tint, I'm referring to adding white to a color. So adding white or tinting a color creates a lighter and often brighter version of that color. When we talk about shades, we're talking about adding black to colors, and that makes them darker and usually reduces their vibrancy. And then when we talk about tones, we're talking about adding gray or a combination of black and white to make hues less vibrant and less saturated, but not necessarily darker. So when people talk about muted colors, they're talking usually about tones. And you can actually use a grayscale like this one when you're painting to help identify the value of a color. Identifying color value helps you determine whether or not you've got the right amount of contrast between objects or within an object. Once this grayscale is dry, for example, you can actually cut it out, hold it up against your painting while you're working, and squint your eyes to determine value accuracy. So from the colors on the color wheel and the grayscale that we've just made, we can basically mix every color inside of the shaded area in the hue and chroma color wheel on the right. The maker of this color wheel, Todd M. Casey, is an artist and also the author of the Oil Painter's Color Handbook, which I can't recommend highly enough. He plotted out the chroma, or the intensity and vibrancy, of each paint on the color wheel with the most intense colors on the outside of the circle. So cadmium red medium has a pretty high chroma, while ultramarine blue and cadmium lemon are about as high chroma as it gets, and that's why they sit on the outskirts of the circle. One of the reasons why I chose them to be part of this limited palette is because it's easy to tone down colors, but next to impossible to make them more vibrant. Now I'll show you how to mix all of the colors between yellow and red. I'm going to start with yellow on the left and red on the right, and I'll create a medium orange in the middle. Above each color, I'll add progressively more black with each row so you can see not only darker and darker shades, but also how the combination of burnt umber and ultramarine blue interacts with each color. Pigments all behave differently and don't always blend in predictable ways. Something else that's interesting about oil paint and impacts how colors blend is each paint's opacity, which varies. Cadmium lemon and cadmium red, for example, are both pretty opaque, while ultramarine blue and burnt umber, even though they're darker colors, are more transparent. So when you blend cadmium yellow and cadmium red together, their combinations will also be opaque. But when you mix one of the opaque colors with a transparent color, the combinations will become less opaque. Greater transparency can sometimes throw you off because it makes colors look superficially darker than they are. And you can see in the lower rows where I'm adding titanium white, the combinations are not only becoming lighter and brighter, but even more opaque thanks to titanium white's opacity. As I'm filling in these squares, I'm trying as best I can to get approximately the same value going across each row. So as you're watching, go ahead and squint your eyes and you can see, at least hopefully you can see, that the colors in each row almost blend together. Having approximately the same value going across each row can help when you're trying to decide on what color you want to use in a painting. One of the arguments that Todd M. Casey makes, and I agree with, is that you can swap out different colors as long as the value of the color is correct. You see this in a lot of Impressionist paintings. As we approach the end of the yellow and red color mixing chart, I hope you can see all the wonderful rich greens in the top left, browns and maroons in the top right, and coral salmon colors in the bottom right. I'll zoom in so you can take a closer look. And just a heads up, I'm putting all of the color charts that you'll see in this video into a single PDF document, which you can download off of my site for free. I'll add a link to this video's description. Up next, I'm going to show you all of the colors that can be blended between cadmium lemon and ultramarine blue. We'll paint this chart the same way we did with the yellow and red chart, which is direct color blending across the middle row, shades on top, and tints below. All right, raise your hand if when you started painting, you basically painted right from the tube. I'm raising my hand right now because I actually remember standing with a tube of paint in my hand and a paintbrush in the other hand, and I would just squeeze some paint out when I needed it. And I might even actually use the canvas as my palette to blend the colors versus a palette off to the side. I think this is totally normal. Most of us grew up using crayons and colored pencils, and we start, using paint the same way when we first get them. But as we get more experience and more confidence, we start discovering the magic of color blending. And you can see as this chart's getting filled in with these lovely greens in between blue and yellow, that we feel drawn to certain colors and they start appearing in our work over and over again. This is part of finding your artist voice and part of your expression. If this was a room full of kindergartners, they'd all have the same ultramarine blue sky and cadmium lemon sun and a sort of messy green for the hills, and basically the paintings would look the same. So color and our unique choice of color blending is one of the things that differentiates us from each other. And now I'll show you how to blend the colors between cadmium red and ultramarine blue. In the color wheel that we made, the purple that gets created between ultramarine blue and cadmium red is more on the maroon side. However, as soon as you add titanium white, these purples come alive, and there's actually a wide range of purples that you can create. They're not as high chroma as the purples that you can create with quinacridone magenta, for example. So I'll actually show you in a little bit here colors, optional colors that you can add if you want a really high chroma purple. Otherwise, you're going to get lots of really nice shades of like warm purples and interesting browns. And honestly, these warmer, more subdued purples are fabulous if you're a portrait artist or even a nature artist like me, especially because you can add them to shadows to make them more alive, rather than just having them be a flat gray. One of the tricks that artists like to use is adding complementary colors to the shadows. So if you're using more yellows and oranges in an object, you can add some of these purples in the shadows, and it'll add interest to the object and the shadow. In addition to the primary color mixing charts, I also mixed primary and secondary colors together, or complementary colors. So these are colors that are opposite of each other on the color wheel. So first up we have yellow and purple, and I'll zoom in so you can see it better. Then I did orange and blue. and then red and green. And then I mixed the secondary colors with each other. So up top we've got orange and purple, orange and green, and then green and purple. I also blended all of the primary and secondary colors with burnt umber so you can see how the blends look without ultramarine blue. I'll zoom in on each of them so you can get a closer look. Here's yellow in burnt umber. Notice how you get hues that mimic Naples yellow. You also get some really nice neutral and warm browns with orange and burnt umber. With red and burnt umber, you get rich to pale, dusty rose and mauve combinations depending on how much titanium white you add. Those were the warm colors mixed with burnt umber, and now I'll show you the cool colors mixed with burnt umber. So that's green, blue, and purple, and I'll show you them individually. Here's green and burnt umber, blue and burnt umber, and purple and burnt umber. This is our limited palette. If I was to remove one color, it would be burnt umber, because you can actually make a lot of different dark browns just with those 4 colors, yellow, red, and blue. So between red and blue and red and green, you get a lot of colors that can almost mimic burnt umber. However, they will blend differently than burnt umber. So we'll put it back in the palette. If I was to add one more color, it would be cobalt teal, which is pigment PG50 or PB28 sometimes. And this really opens up your palette to really vibrant greens, as well as turquoise and teal. If I were to add one more color, it would be magenta with pigment PR122. And magenta creates a really vibrant pink when you add titanium white. So you'll get really rich, lovely purples when you mix it with cobalt teal or ultramarine blue. To illustrate the difference, the shaded area represents the approximate color range that can be mixed with a limited palette of just 5 colors. This is the color range that can be mixed with the addition of cobalt teal, and this, basically most of the circle now, can be mixed with the addition of cobalt teal and magenta. Looking at the combination of cadmium, lemon, cobalt teal, and magenta on the right reminds me of printer ink. And there's a good reason why these colors work well for printer ink. It's an efficient way to create an extremely wide range of colors. But really, it's up to you which colors and how many colors you'd like on your palette. I hope you found this video helpful. Please feel free to ask any questions, and if you'd like to have a copy of the color charts, I've added a link below.